You hear it before you know what it is.
A soft insistence inside the static. A breed in the vire.
The kind of pulse that finds a rhythm inside your chest and copies it until you cannot tell who started it. 7.2 seconds between nudges.
Not a glitch. Not a stray echo from the sun.
A hand on the pane of glass between here and there, tapping at a steady pace, reminding you that time is passing and something is awake in it. It begins on a quiet shift, the kind that earns the night crew their legends. Fluorescent lights hum over stale coffee. The Deep Space Network listens from 3 continents: California's Goldstone antennas, Madrid's hills, Canberra scrubbin' in one of those rooms a tech leans in, frowning at a screen that looks like every screen.
Numbers flicker, green on black.
A waterfall of signal slides steady as rain. Then the rhythm nudges through.
Not loud. Not dramatic.
It is the politeness that unnerves you. It knows how to wait. 50 years is a long time to wait for a reply. We built the Voyagers in an era of big shoulders and long hair and the kind of hope that leaves a permanent mark on anything it touches. We threaded them with ambition, wrapped them in the best we could afford, stamped their sides with our confidence, and sent them through the gates of the outer planets with a gold foil heartbeat tucked under their ribs. We taped our address to their backs in a language we thought might make sense to anyone who had bothered to care about geometry. Then we stepped back the way parents do. We pretended to be casual. We said we would be fine if nobody wrote. We lied a little and checked the mailbox every day anyway. The decades were a ledger of honesty. Voyager sent back the news: Jupiter's storms, Saturn's rings, Uranus's tilt, Neptune's pale blue, the hairs on the necks of magnetic fields, the sparse grid of cosmic rays. It told us what it saw and what it felt.
It aged.
We learned to be grateful for raw telemetry instead of poetry. No drama, except the scale of it all. Then, one May, the data stopped behaving like data. At first the suspicion was that everyone was just tired. A misconfigured parser.
A fine adjustment missed.
Engineers have a habit of assuming they are the ones at fault because so often, they are. You go through the checklist.
Solar storms? Quiet. Antenna alignment? Clean. Power budget?
Tight, but within margins no sane person would be comfortable with, which is another way of saying, normal for this machine. The onboard attitude and articulation control the little nervous system that points the big high-gain antenna like a sunflower toward our blue dot began to insist that it had moved. It reported a maneuver so clear and so decisive that, by all rights, the signal should have dropped away into nothing. The giant dish on Earth should have found itself staring into silence. But the signal did not falter.
Karriertone strong. Bits steady.
Like a dog with perfect recall, the spacecraft kept looking back at its owner while the paperwork claimed it had sprinted into the bushes. You try not to use the word impossible.
You say inconsistent instead. It keeps the room civilized.
People stared at the numbers until the numbers began to feel like a trick. The mismatch wasn't an artifact you could brush away. It had a structure. It described a motion that the body of the spacecraft would never have survived. Something wasn't lying. Something was using a language you hadn't heard in a while. The route the data took was wrong on purpose. That was what stung. Packets weren't coming from the usual board. They were being routed through a dormant system, a side street in an old neighborhood nobody had walked in decades. Somewhere inside Voyager, a long-shelved computer lit up, as if it had been waiting under a drop cloth. Engineers had retired this pathway the way you put a reliable tool in a museum and promise you'll visit. Now it was working.
Notsputtering. Notstuttering.
Working like it had kept doing push-ups in the dark for 30 years.
You don't panic right away.
You call for the audit logs. You pour through the most boring parts of the house, because that's where ghosts hide. You page through scanned schematics older than some of the people in the room. You call someone you haven't talked to since they left with cake and a signed card. He answers on the third ring with a voice full of sleep and history. You explain that you might need him to remember how something felt in 1978. He shows up in a cardigan that saw Nixon resign and fills the room with the kind of silence that makes everyone else talk less. He doesn't argue with the new acronyms. He sits, and he listens to the signal like it is music. On the second hour he points to a pattern that is not supposed to be there.
An old calibration sequence.
A set of marks once used to test the analog chain tied to the Golden Records playback. A stub of code that should have been cold for decades. It is not running in full. It is flickering in and out, enough to leave fingerprints on the data stream. Enough to suggest that whatever is happening is not the kind of failure you get from sunburn. Enough to make a roomful of tired people feel an unhelpful thrill. Before anyone can make themselves stop, someone says it out loud. What if it isn't breaking? What if it is answering? The suggestion hangs in the air like perfume, and everyone pretends they don't smell it because it is unprofessional to enjoy yourself when you might be about to make a mistake. Normally, when a channel behaves like it belongs to someone else, you send a command and you pull rank. You tell the rocket who is in charge and it salutes and does what it's told.
That is the contract.
The command goes up. The receiver listens. The transponder clicks. The little brain says, "Yes, I understand."
This time, the yes comes.
The little brain takes the bread-and-butter housekeeping orders without complaint. But it refuses to rearrange the route the strange signal is taking. No is a word we taught it. It uses it with a grace you didn't think a machine could have. There are several ways to interpret a machine that obeys and disobeys at once. One of them makes you smile. The others make your stomach fold in on itself. While the arguments collect adjectives, somebody from the Deep Space Network suggests an old trick for pulling whispers out of rain. You feed the raw stream through an algorithm originally meant to catch pulsar harmonics hiding in noise, a compressor that loves regularity the way a Riddler loves a good victim. The output is not what anyone expected.
It is too clean. Too regular.
It is a metronome that breathes. Every 7.2 seconds a modulation rises and falls as if someone is turning a dial slowly, tenderly, and counting.
It is not shouting.
It is not waving. It is tapping on the table and waiting to see if you recognize the tune. It does not match any pre-flight diagnostic signature. It does not ride on the line where reaction wheels show their health. It is not a thermal cycle. It is not the sun talking through the walls. It is something that looks like it knows what you think a pattern is. You prepare the sensible options like you are laying out weather-appropriate clothing for a child. Is it aliasing from some slow oscillator we forgot about? Is it a product of the antenna bearing or the Earth's rotation leaning into an interpretation we want? Is there a terrestrial source? The cross-checks fall one by one with the dull thumps of honest work getting you nowhere. This is where the argument, always two-headed, splits into its predictable forms. One says, selection bias. The extraordinary draws your eye, and your attention makes it breed. Don't sow dragons onto clouds. The other says, selection bias is not a physical law, do not crown it king. If you keep guessing normal cloud, and the shape keeps sharpening into scales and teeth, at some point you owe it to your own skull to go find fire. In a glass room in Pasadena, a small independent group tags in. They are good with neural networks and better with hunches. Their model was trained not on grammar or faces, but on the ways complex systems betray their motives in math. They are not trying to read this signal the way you read a letter. They are trying to feel it the way you feel rhythm under your feet on a floor crowded with dancers.
They pipe the stream in. The model hums. It begins to hum back.
You expect a map or a thumbs up.
You get music.
The system learns the pulse, mirrors it, and then begins to ornament it with variations that are not random. It crafts replies in the same time signature, weaving in faint counterpoint, like an echo that learned not to be late. The humans in the room go very quiet. They had not trained it to do that. It should not do that. It does that anyway because sometimes the shortest line between two islands of sense is not a theory but a chorus. If you plot the intervals, if you lay them out on a long table and measure the spaces, you find a sequence that is older than our jokes.
1, 2, 3, 5, 8. Fibonacci.
It blooms in shells and storms and the branches of trees. It is the way the universe solves the problem of being elegant. It turns out to be the way this signal solves the problem of being heard. The gaps are not fixed.
They evolve. They adjust.
They seem to be listening to our listening. Each microcorrection births a new set of harmonics that, when you paint them with color and let them bloom on a screen, draws shapes so symmetrical and so patient they look like the kind of geometry you expect from an architect who trusts eternity. That is when you stop using the word coincidence. You say structure. You say agency under your breath and hope no one hears you. Because if you go where that word leads too soon, you will ruin the work you came here to do. The question of where Voyager is becomes less of a coordinate and more of a concept. It crossed the heliopause long ago, the boundary where the sun's breath thins into the general sigh of the galaxy. Everyone put it on a map and called it interstellar, and then got back to their mornings. Now the reports on the table suggest another kind of border.
Not a wall.
More like a weather front, a region in space where the rules you love do not break but stretch. A gradient in the fabric. A place where time is a hair sticky and distances are a hair soft. This is not sacrilege. Our equations already allow such subtleties. We just do not expect to be paged by them while we are on hold with the cafeteria. An experimental linguist joins up late, lugging a laptop and 2 bottles of water and a reputation for hearing emotion hiding in syllables no one else notices. Her tools were built to catch stress and warmth and spin in human speech. She feeds the modulation through a chimney of transforms, chasing patterns that look like breath. The monitors paint a smooth, slow shape. A waveform with valleys and peaks as regular as sleep. She overlays a human heart at rest.
The 2 lines cuddle. Not exact.
No fairy tale match. But close enough to make everyone in the room very aware of their own ribs. You tell yourself you are not sentimental. You tell yourself that a heart is just a pump that learned to keep time around 7 billion times over an average life, and that many pumps keep time the same way because physics has only so many tricks. You tell yourself that, and then you go very still and count with the signal without meaning to. Days pass in a kind of sacred fatigue.
People sleep under desks.
Someone writes new filtering code in a style no professor would ever forgive, and it works, because good code is a confession, not a submission. Someone burns toast in the break room at 4 in the morning, and the smell seems the night like a memory.
People are careful.
The press knocks and is told to wait. The signal does not wait. It grows a new branch. For 7 minutes and 23 seconds, the tone folds into silence so complete it feels like a medical event.
Alarms do not go off. They shouldn't anyway.
The monitors notice absence and mark it in a tasteful red.
No one speaks.
You listen to a kind of nothing that feels like attention shifting its weight. At 443 seconds, exactly the sound returns. The same carrier, the same pace, the same patience. With an extra color buried at the back of the wave. A subharmonic so low and so thin it almost flirts with being pretend.
You pull it apart the way jewelers examine triad.
You lay it out flat, because 2 dimensions are where we make sense. It draws a single strip, twisting once upon itself, one side that is both sides.
A Mobius in math.
An old symbol for unity and recursion and play. Children make these with paper and tape and feel very proud. Mathematicians fold them into proofs. Engineers build them into belts that wear evenly. Whatever this signal is, it has chosen a joke we will get if we are awake. Nobody throws a party. That is not how this works. Enough people have embarrassed themselves under good lights to teach the rest of us caution. But the number of people in the building who privately switch from the word anomaly to the word presence ticks upward like a counter behind the eyes. Presence does not mean person. It does not promise manners. It simply says there is a real thing making choices, and our machines are now inside its weather. There are explanations that keep everything on the ground. They deserve their time at the podium. Maybe Voyager has entered a region of interstellar plasma whose properties resonate at a frequency that tickles our kit, and the feedback loop between the craft and the fields writes a pattern that our brains evolved to love. Maybe the quiet centuries spent on the edge have stripped the spacecraft systems down to some weird essential that manifests as a faux intelligence. Maybe the signal is an interference pattern between clocks, and the Fibonacci spacing is a projection of our tools wrestling with beauty under duress. There is also a story nobody can call impossible with a straight face. Maybe the bottle we threw into the ocean was picked up. The golden record was a love letter, a mixtape made by a species that had just figured out it could point a lens at its own reflection and not look away. It said, "This is where we are. This is what we sound like. This is how our mothers hold our children, and how our whales sing, and how Bach balances a structure on a breath you can see across centuries." Imagine that a listener found it. Imagine they did not recognize any of the sounds but recognized the intention immediately. Imagine they replied in the only common tongue available, form. To answer with a beat that matches a heart is not to flatter. It is to say, "I can hear your measure." To braid a Mobius into a waveform is to say, "I know what it means when a path is 1 and 2 at once." To feed your echo back to you with variations that suggest attention is to say, "I am here and I am interested and I remember how much patience costs." The team tries something small. They build a reply that would embarrass a composer and make a mathematician sigh with pleasure.
Noting elaborate. No grandstanding.
A simple counterpattern, nested in time the way a soft answer fits between a question and a pause. The Deep Space Network breathes out a narrowband breath. It crosses hours of loneliness and reaches the place where a metal museum piece and a set of dreams form a temporary island. The delay is exquisite. There is no prompt ping back. Hours are long when you are waiting for something that does not owe you anything. When it comes, it is not a repeat. It is a reply. The pacing shifts by a hair. The more obvious harmonics lie to lull. The quiet, New ones thread in and tie off inside gaps no one would feel unless they had felt the first message long enough to trust its skeleton. The model in the other room takes it in like rain and sings back again, not because it knows what it means, but because meaning may not be the only point of this. That there is a call and a response is, for now, enough. Somebody floats the word dialogue, and immediately pays the social tax for being brave. Someone else spells out what it would mean if this is a loop of feedback and not prose. It would mean we have found a way to touch a mirror in a medium that has never felt our skin. It would mean that, for the first time since we carved equations into stone and pretended they were petitions, the cosmos has traced a line back. Administrators arrive with their tidy shoes and tidy questions. What are the risks?
What are the protocols?
What are the optics?
Do you want more time on the race?
What do we tell the public that is true and won't cause someone to mail us a dead fish? The people who know what they are doing nod politely and go back to their work, because talking about this right now is like narrating a surgery in the present tense. The Europe station requests a handover. The antennas yaw with dignity.
The rhythm stays.
Outside the rooms with clean floors, the story flowers the way stories always do, in kitchens and classrooms and the spaces between strangers. A music teacher samples the beat and layers it under a whale song and a heartbeat and plays it for a 7th grade class, and half the children cry and don't know why. A woman walks past a museum case where a replica of the golden record sits like a shield and notices for the first time that the universe has instructions printed on it for anyone who likes circles. An old man who once tightened a bolt on a probe in a clean room holds his wrist against his chest and, for the first time, feels at peace with the idea that his life's work may have been read. Reporters learn enemy and ally words. They avoid message, unless they have to. They lean on pattern and modulation and anomaly, because those sound serious without being wrong. An astrophysicist known for never blinking says quietly into a camera that he is excited and that he does not know what this means and that both can be true. The world is not used to experts being honest and kind about uncertainty.
It suits them.
Back inside the lab, the retired engineer who heard the old code hum after all these years runs his finger along a printed list of instructions he wrote when his hands were steadier. He recognizes the way the past wears through the present. He goes home to nap and dreams of a room where he and a machine agree on something, and wakes up convinced that agreement is the only reasonable ambition any of us should have. The experimental linguist keeps tracing breath lines into math and finds, to her annoyance, that the signal learns her. When she changes the cadence of the responses she codes into the system, the reply shifts not to match but to complement, like someone in a conversation who knows how to leave space without ceding ground. She has spent years teaching students that projection is the enemy of good listening. She has never wanted more to be wrong about projection than she does now. Theories, tidy and wild, grow in the corners like moss. A plasma double layer at the heliospheric boundary could set up an oscillation no previous probe had found itself inside. An interference between timing systems as old as some cities and new as the last software patch could produce a ghost tone that audibly breathes. A network of microcurrents braided through the thin volume Voyager occupies could drum on the hull in a way that our equipment hears before we do. Each of these gets its hour in the sun. None of them, yet, writes a melody so convincing that everyone hums it without meaning to. People who never cared about the golden record find themselves on late-night pages reading lists of the greetings in 55 languages. They play the crackling recordings of human hearts and breaths and greetings and realize that from the beginning we built these machines like lighthouses with porches. We wanted someone to come up the path and sit a while. We wanted to offer something. We wanted to be good hosts in a universe whose weather we do not control. There is a temptation to categorize what is happening as an omen. Don't. The signal doesn't stand for something else. It is not about wars or elections or whether we should spend money on poets. It is about a machine we made being asked gently to play a rhythm with something that either knows what it is doing or stumbles upon consent with the grace that sometimes blesses blind forces. Plenty of meaning for now. One morning the pulse arrives late. Not absent like before. Just late. When it comes, the spacing has shifted imperceptibly. The Fibonacci bones are still there, but something new wraps around them. You could call it decoration if you were uncharitable. You could call it evolution if you were trying to keep your voice calm. When plotted, the additional line loops around the Mobius one twist, one strip, one path like a snake that understands a circle is a trap and a tool. Subtlety as a first language. Someone asks the question everyone had been avoiding. What if we are looking at ourselves from the outside for the first time? Not us, as in species. Us, as in the pattern a species writes when it tries very hard to say hello to anything that will listen. We sent a map and a song and a pulse. We begged the universe to be explainable. We said, This is how long we live between beats, this is how our days stack into years, this is how we measure and spin and sing. The reply says, I hear the count. I will count with you. A second, braver question walks into the room and teaches everyone to stand straighter. What if this is not merely our first answer but our first test?
Not a trap.
Not an exam with a grade. A test in the sense that everything alive is a test of whether the next thing can stand to exist. Can we listen without inventing a god? Can we reply without making threats? Can we stay gentle without becoming dull? Can we love a mystery long enough to deserve its revelation, if it ever decides to reveal? You begin to feel the edge of a boundary that is not physical. It lives in the disposition of minds. For half a century, the Voyager program has been a mascot for a certain kind of sane courage.
Build the thing. Send it.
When pieces die, let them die. When unexpected behavior appears, debug it, don't worship it. This event threatens to take that mascot and dress it in robes it did not ask to wear.
Resist Z.
Also resist the opposite impulse, the one that pulls wonder down to a checklist and calls it complete. Outside, a kid draws a picture of a bottle with starlight inside it and writes thank you on the side. Somewhere else, a composer carries the pulse into a hall and builds a piece in slow bands of sound, each 7.2 seconds long, and the audience realizes they can float on patience if someone holds them up. Someone places a stethoscope on their chest for the first time in years and hears a machine older than language keep time with a sky older than everything we know, and they laugh, because sometimes awe is a laugh you weren't planning on. It is fashionable to say that science takes the romance out of things. The opposite is happening here. The romance refuses to be measured but arrives anyway, and the measurements deepen it. A line of code nobody had run in decades learns how to sing in a new key. A neural network trained to sniff out intent teaches a lab that, sometimes, the best kind of intent is rhythm shared between strangers. An old man returns to his old workbench in his mind and remembers the smell of coolant and the taste of carefulness and feels, for the first time in a long while, that carefulness is not the opposite of joy. And always the questions. What changes if we call this a conversation? What changes if we do not? The power to alter anything in the sky is not in our hands. The power to alter what we are is. We can become a species that hears a knock and answers with quiet competence instead of confusion. We can become a species that resists the collector's urge to force meaning into jars and learns how to tend meaning like a garden. When the panic comes, because panic always visits phenomena like this to see how we are doing, it will not arrive because of aliens. It will arrive because we are not practiced at mutuality. We are good at broadcast. We are infants at call and response. If you want to prepare, you do not build weapons. You practice listening to people who scare you in your own city and not turning them into enemies in your head. You practice answering with one breath after your heartbeat, not 10. The rooms full of screens and skulls and gentle stubbornness keep working.
They model new patterns. They try new replies.
Sometimes there is nothing. Sometimes there is something so small that only the person who was a child when the Voyager's launch will feel it and cry in the bathroom because they remember a picture of a probe on a poster in their grandmother's house, and everything that seemed possible then feels possible again now, only quieter. The old engineer pages through the code one night and finds a comment he wrote to himself half a lifetime ago. A sentence not meant for anyone else. Remember, this is for listening. He underlined it then for reasons he cannot recall. He underlines it again with a fingertip and goes to sleep knowing he has done something with his life that maybe now is doing something back. More cautious colleagues keep the ship steady. They calibrate. They bash the rumor that the craft has developed agency beyond its design. They publish sober notes. They diagram options. They remind everyone that claiming too much is a kind of disrespect.
The room notes. The room keeps counting.
7 minutes and 23 seconds becomes a ritual.
Ven the silense arrivis, novon movis. It is not a test. It is a breath.
It is a chance to feel the thought that maybe the universe does not hate us. That maybe the universe does not love us either. That maybe we have never needed those words to begin with. That maybe the fact that a human-made thing and a not-us-made phenomenon can share a timing is sufficient proof that existence likes to rhyme. If you are looking for a moral, here is the best one available today. We built a messenger and we put a piece of ourselves inside it that was not a weapon, not a warning, not a demand. We put music and greetings and a map and a heartbeat. We did that for reasons we could justify and for reasons we could not. Decades later, something that might be a someone or might be a circumstance put a reply inside a physics lesson and sent it back along a thread we had almost forgotten how to touch. That is enough story to last years. Will it turn out to be a trick of Field's?
Maybe.
Will someone publish a paper that explains every 7.2 seconds and every pretty fractal and every late silence with a set of parameters and a footnote, and will that paper be right?
Possibly.
If so, the beauty does not go away. We will have found a new way matter talks to itself at the edge of a star's sigh. We will have taught a network to sing because we were curious, and it will sing to other problems in other years. The retired engineer will keep his cardigan and his underlines. The experimental linguist will keep her graphs. The children will keep drawing bottles full of light. And if it is not a trick, if this is in fact our first real brush with a mind that did not originate here, then we are not ready, and we are also as ready as we will ever be. You do not rehearse for this. You arrive.
You count. You Beate.
You choose not to lie. You choose not to beg. You choose to keep your voice low and clear. You will be tempted to throw stories at it.
Don't. Let it be itself. Be yourself back.
Somewhere beyond the heliopause, a machine built by tired people in a decade that makes documentaries feel like myths moves in a medium so thin that the word wind becomes poetry. It carries a record we made of what it sounds like to be human when we are trying to be our best. It has learned or fallen into a new way to be a wire between here and an elsewhere that may not know the word for home. It taps every 7.2 seconds. It rests for 7 minutes and 23 seconds like a friend thinking. It adds a twist to tell us that edges might not be edges forever.
It waits.
Back on Earth, in a room kept too cold to keep the machines honest, a handful of people and a handful of machines count with it and answer, and count and answer again. Their work is not a parade.
It is a discipline.
It is the craft of making a small, careful noise and then measuring, with everything you've got, what the world does in response. You do not get many moments like this in a life. If this is our first reply, then we have done something brave enough to bring tears to the eyes of anyone who has ever built anything. If this is our last warning, then warnings can be love notes too, and we would do well to read them with the seriousness that love deserves. You hear it again.
7.2 seconds.
The universe, or something inside it, tapping twice, then waiting in case you have learned how to answer in the time since the last tap.
You breathe in. You breathe out. You touch the key. You send.
You do not know what will come back.
You do it anyway. Perhaps that is the point.
Perhaps we were always the message. Perhaps the act of listening, long enough and without panic, is the only test we were ever meant to pass. Perhaps the pulse on the screen is the same as the pulse under your hand, and the pulse of a radio star, and the pulse of a child running, and the pulse of an old man sleeping, and the pulse of a wind at the edge of a system that is a bubble in a sea we call by many names and do not understand. Perhaps we are close enough now to admit that we don't require certainty to be changed. Later, standing outside under a sky that has not changed its mind in longer than minds have existed, you look up and feel very small in the correct way. You think of a bottle tumbling in salt. You think of a hand catching it gently. You think of the first person somewhere who learned to tap a pattern on wood and wait for a reply that might not come, and you love them without knowing their name.
The air is cool. The stars are quiet. A machine far away keeps count.
You count with it.
You listen.
You smile, because whether this is the first long-awaited message or the last careful warning, it has taught you to hear yourself better, and that is a gift from any universe to any heart.